The flashing blue and red lights bounced across the polished glass entrance of the Belmont Grand Hotel just as the Monday morning rush hit its highest point. Employees froze in the middle of their duties. Guests stopped wheeling their suitcases across the marble floor. A bellhop dropped a set of keys that clattered against the tile, but nobody bent down to pick them up. Two uniformed police officers pushed through the revolving door with hard expressions and determined footsteps. They did not stop at the front desk. They did not ask for directions. They walked straight past the concierge, past the fountain in the middle of the lobby, and directly toward a quiet maintenance worker wearing a neatly pressed gray uniform. His name tag read Darius. He was carrying a small toolbox in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He had just finished fixing a leaking pipe in one of the executive suites, and he was on his way to check the boiler room before lunch. He looked up when he heard the sound of heavy boots approaching, and his face went pale. Within seconds, cold metal handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists in front of everyone, including his boss, his coworkers, and dozens of complete strangers who were now pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The man did not fight back. He did not shout. He did not even try to explain himself. He simply lowered his head for one heartbreaking moment, not because he feared prison, and not because he was ashamed of the uniform he wore. He lowered his head because he suddenly remembered that his 8-year-old son would be waiting at the school bus stop that afternoon for a father who might never come home. A woman near the fountain whispered to her husband loud enough for Darius to hear, "I always thought there was something off about him." She had never met him a day in her life. She had never spoken to him. She had made up her mind about who he was in less than 30 seconds, based on nothing but the color of his skin and the sight of a pair of handcuffs. Darius heard her. He said nothing. He had been hearing versions of that same whisper his entire adult life. He had learned a long time ago that the quietest kind of dignity is the hardest kind for the world to take from you. None of the officers standing in that lobby knew that the silent man they had just arrested was not dangerous at all. They also had no idea that a phone call was already being made across town and that someone far more formidable than any of them was about to walk through those hotel doors and change everything. Before we continue this powerful story, if you believe kindness, second chances, and the unshakable love of a parent can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment below, share it with someone who might need hope today, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this one to life every single week. The man in handcuffs was named Darius Holloway. He was 38 years old, a widowed single father who had spent the last 6 years of his life rebuilding something that most people would have given up on. His wife Simone had passed away from a sudden and aggressive illness when their son Elijah was only 2 years old. One day she was laughing in the kitchen. 6 weeks later, Darius was standing at her funeral holding a toddler who kept asking when mommy was coming home. For a long time after that, Darius could not sleep, could not eat, could not even look at photographs without breaking down. But he had a son, and that son needed a father. So he got up every single morning, even when his heart felt like it was made of broken glass, and he kept going. He learned how to braid Elijah's hair before school, even though the first few months looked so uneven that a kind older woman at church finally sat him down one Sunday and gently taught him how to do it right. He learned how to pack lunches that would not embarrass a boy in front of his classmates. He learned that a 5-year-old boy will refuse to eat a sandwich if the crusts touch the peanut butter, but will happily eat the exact same sandwich if you cut the crusts off first. He learned that a school field trip permission slip needs to be signed the night before, not the morning of, or you will be running out the door with a pen in one hand and a shoelace still untied. He worked double shifts fixing electrical systems and repairing broken equipment at the Belmont Grand Hotel, one of the most prestigious hotels in the entire city. He attended every parent-teacher meeting, even the ones scheduled at inconvenient hours. He never missed a school play, a science fair, or a birthday. And no matter how exhausted he was, He read a bedtime story to Elijah every single night without exception, even on the nights when he could barely keep his own eyes open, even on the nights when he had already read the same book 50 times that month. His life was brutal, but every ounce of sacrifice was worth it every time he saw his son smile. Darius never asked anyone for sympathy. Most people at the Belmont Grand only knew him as the quiet maintenance technician who always arrived 30 minutes early and stayed 30 minutes late whenever another employee needed help covering a shift. His boss, Diane Whitaker, respected him more than she respected almost anyone else on her staff, because in 15 years of running that hotel, she had never met a man who complained less about a life that had given him more reasons to complain than most. She often told the other supervisors that if she ever needed to trust one employee with the master keys to the entire building, it would be Darius Holloway. That trust was exactly what made him the perfect target. Unknown to Darius, several extremely expensive pieces of hotel equipment had gone missing over the previous month. High-end audio-visual gear from the conference rooms, industrial kitchen appliances from the banquet storage, even a set of imported chandeliers that had been waiting in a locked warehouse for installation in the ballroom. Security investigators had spent weeks trying to figure out how someone was getting past the electronic locks without triggering any alarms. Eventually, they discovered something that seemed like a breakthrough. Someone had been using Darius Holloway's employee access card to enter restricted storage areas during the exact times the thefts had occurred. Surveillance footage showed a worker wearing a maintenance uniform moving through the hallways during those times. The person's face was always hidden beneath a cap and always managed to stay just outside the clearest camera angles. But the badge was Darius's. The uniform was the same style Darius wore. The timing lined up. To the investigators, the evidence appeared convincing enough that they went to a judge and obtained an arrest warrant before completing a proper full investigation. They believed they had their man. They did not want to give him time to run. That Monday morning, the officers entered the hotel believing they had found their suspect. Darius looked stunned as they read him his rights. He quietly insisted, over and over, that there had to be some kind of mistake, that he had never even been near half of those storage areas. But the officers had a warrant, and warrants did not care about protests. As guests whispered to each other and co-workers stared in disbelief, Diane Whitaker rushed forward and tried to explain what kind of man Darius really was. She told the officers that this employee had worked at the hotel for 6 years without a single complaint, that he was raising a child alone, that he was the last person on earth who would steal anything from anyone. But procedure left almost no room for argument. The handcuffs remained locked. The hardest moment for Darius was not the humiliation of being paraded through the lobby in front of dozens of people. It was not even the fear of losing the job he had worked so hard to keep. The hardest moment was remembering something his son had said the night before. Elijah had come home from school beaming with pride, carrying a small wooden birdhouse he had built for a class project. He had painted only half of it, because his teacher had said the second coat should be done at home with a parent. Elijah had wrapped his little arms around his father and whispered, "Daddy, promise me we can finish it tomorrow after school." Promise? Darius had promised. And now, as the police escorted him through the revolving door and out into the cold morning air, all he could think about was who would be waiting at the school bus stop that afternoon when Elijah stepped off, looking around for a father who was not there. Across town, in a quiet neighborhood filled with old brick houses and tall oak trees, another man was sitting at his kitchen table when his phone rang. His name was Marcus Bennett. Everyone who knew him called him Big Cross, a nickname he had earned during his years of service and never bothered to correct. He was 65 years old, a retired Navy SEAL who rarely attracted attention despite 3 decades of extraordinary service to his country. He kept his medals in a wooden box in the closet. He never wore his old uniform in public. He never told stories about the missions that had left permanent scars on his body and deeper ones on his memory. He had settled into civilian life the same way he had lived his military life. Quietly, efficiently, without ever asking for thanks. Big Cross volunteered 3 days a week at the local Veterans Center, where he helped younger men and women learn how to transition back into civilian life. He repaired homes for elderly neighbors who could not afford to hire contractors. He drove church members to medical appointments when their families could not. And every few weeks, he stopped by the Belmont Grand Hotel to have coffee with a man he had come to think of as a younger brother. That man was Darius Holloway. Big Cross knew Darius better than almost anyone alive. 6 years earlier, right after Simone had died, Darius had nearly fallen apart completely. He had stopped going to work. He had stopped answering his phone. One night, a mutual friend had called Big Cross and asked him to check on the young father because nobody had heard from him in 3 days. Big Cross had driven to Darius's house, let himself in through the unlocked back door, and found the man sitting on the kitchen floor holding a photograph of his wife and staring at the wall. Big Cross had sat down on the floor next to him without saying a word. He stayed there for 2 hours. Finally, he had spoken one sentence. "Your boy is upstairs asleep in his crib, and when he wakes up in the morning, he is going to need a father." That was all it took. From that day forward, Big Cross became something between an uncle, a mentor, and an older brother to Darius. He reminded him, again and again, that real strength was not measured by never falling down. It was measured by always standing back up for the people who depended on you. Big Cross had lost his own wife decades earlier, long before Darius had ever known him. He had never remarried. He had never had children of his own. When people asked him why, he would only smile and say, "The Lord had other plans for me." But everyone who knew him well suspected the truth. Big Cross had loved his wife so deeply that after she was gone, he had simply decided to pour that love into other people's families instead of building a new one for himself. Darius and Elijah had become, in every way that mattered, his family. And a man like Big Cross did not take family lightly. So when Big Cross answered his phone that Monday morning and heard the voice of a hotel employee tell him that Darius had just been arrested for theft, he did not waste a single second on disbelief. He knew Darius. He knew what kind of man Darius was. And he knew that whatever had happened, someone had made a very serious mistake. He put on his jacket, grabbed his keys, and walked out to his old pickup truck without saying a word to anyone. He did not call ahead. He did not need to. Some things you handle in person. When Big Cross walked through the front doors of the Belmont Grand Hotel 40 minutes later, something strange happened. An older security guard who had been standing near the reception desk suddenly straightened his posture and gave the tall stranger a subtle nod, the kind of nod that men in certain professions recognize instantly. Big Cross returned the nod and kept walking. Guests looked up as he passed. A woman standing near the elevator lowered her voice mid-sentence. There was nothing loud or dramatic about the way Big Cross entered a room, but somehow every person in the lobby became aware of him at the exact same moment. He walked directly to the front desk and asked, in a calm and steady voice, to speak with the manager. Diane Whitaker came down within 2 minutes. She looked exhausted and shaken. Big Cross introduced himself as a personal friend of Darius Holloway and then asked her one simple question that would change the entire direction of the investigation. He asked to see every single maintenance work order Darius had completed during the same weeks the thefts had taken place. Diane did not hesitate. She led him upstairs to her office and pulled up the digital records on her computer. Together, they went through work orders, repair schedules, time-stamped access logs, and internal security reports. Big Cross had spent his entire military career learning how to notice things that other people missed. He knew that when something looked obvious, it was often because someone wanted it to look that way. So instead of focusing on the evidence the investigators had already highlighted, he searched for the small details that did not fit the story. Within 20 minutes, he found it. Darius had been repairing the rooftop air conditioning systems during 3 of the exact times his employee badge had supposedly been used to enter the storage rooms. Rooftop assignments required a supervisor's approval signature, a safety harness checkout, and generated automatic digital logs the moment the technician swiped into the mechanical access door. Those logs proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Darius had been physically on the roof of the hotel during at least 3 of the thefts. There was no possible way he could have been in the storage rooms at the same time. Someone had cloned his access credentials. Big Cross looked up from the computer and calmly said, "Someone set him up." And they picked him because they knew nobody would question him. Diane put her hand over her mouth. She had already suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it real. Big Cross was not finished yet. He asked to see the raw surveillance footage from every camera in the hotel during the times of the thefts, not the edited clips the investigators had already reviewed. The full, uncut recordings. Meanwhile, across town, Darius sat quietly inside a small holding room at the police station, refusing to let himself grow angry despite everything that had happened. He had not eaten. He had not called a lawyer. He had barely spoken. All he could think about was the clock on the wall and how the hands were moving closer and closer to the time when Elijah's school bus would pull up at their usual stop. A social worker had already been notified that a temporary placement might be needed if no family member could pick up the boy. Darius closed his eyes and tried to breathe through the panic rising in his chest. He did not know that at that exact moment, a man he trusted more than almost anyone in the world was sitting in front of a security monitor at the Belmont Grand Hotel, watching something that would prove his innocence. Big Cross had been reviewing the footage for almost an hour when he noticed something that the original investigators had completely overlooked. A single camera, mounted above an employee side entrance near the loading dock, showed a small hallway that was not part of the main surveillance grid. The camera was old, the image was slightly grainy, and it was not connected to the primary security network. But it was still recording, and what it had recorded was gold. At 3 different points during the theft dates, the footage showed the same maintenance worker walking into the hallway wearing a full uniform and cap. Every time he stopped in a blind spot near the fire exit. Every time, another man wearing casual street clothes appeared from outside, met him at that same spot, and quickly exchanged uniforms with him. The second man would then continue into the restricted areas wearing the maintenance uniform, while the first man would slip out of the loading dock and disappear into the parking lot. The real thief was not Darius Holloway. It never had been. Big Cross paused the video, leaned back in the chair, and let out a long, slow breath. Then he pointed at the screen and asked Diane if she recognized the first man, the one who had been trading uniforms. She looked closely at the frozen image and slowly nodded. His name was Trevor. He worked in the maintenance department. He had been hired just 8 months earlier, and he was one of the few people who had regular access to the employee locker room where Darius kept his spare uniform and his backup access card. Further investigation over the next few hours exposed something even bigger than a single dishonest employee. Trevor had been working with an outside contractor, a man who had been fired from another hotel 6 months earlier for suspected theft. The two of them had built an organized equipment theft ring that had been operating quietly for several weeks. They had deliberately targeted Darius because his spotless 6-year reputation made him look untouchable. They knew that if suspicion ever fell on the maintenance department, everyone would look at the newer employees first. Nobody would look twice at the quiet single father who had never so much as taken an extra sugar packet from the break room. They had used his own honor as a weapon against him. Big Cross gathered every piece of evidence, made copies of every file, and personally drove the entire package to the police precinct where Darius was being held. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam his fist on any tables. He simply walked into the detective's office, placed a folder on the desk, and said, "You have the wrong man. I can prove it right now. And every minute you keep him here is another minute a scared little boy is going to step off a school bus and wonder where his father is." The detective read through the folder in silence. His expression changed with every page. By the time he reached the surveillance stills of Trevor exchanging uniforms in the hallway, his face had gone pale. He looked up at Big Cross and started to say something, then stopped himself. He tried again. "Sir, I have to tell you, in 20 years on this job, I have never seen a civilian put a case together this cleanly. Not once. Who did you say you were again?" Big Cross gave him a small, tired smile. "I did not say. I am just a retired man who happens to know when a good man is being framed." The detective studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like he had figured something out. He did not ask any more questions. He picked up the phone and made 3 quick calls in a row. Within the hour, warrants were being issued for Trevor and his outside contractor partner. And within 90 minutes, a very different pair of officers walked into the small holding room where Darius Holloway was sitting. They removed the handcuffs. They apologized sincerely. They told him every single charge was being dropped immediately. Darius did not shout. He did not cry. He simply asked one question in a voice so quiet the officers almost did not hear him. "Where is my son?" While all of this had been happening, something else was unfolding across town that would break Darius's heart in a way the arrest itself never could. The video of his arrest, filmed by 3 different guests in the lobby that morning, had already gone viral on social media. It had been shared thousands of times before lunch. And somewhere in a middle school cafeteria, an older student had pulled out his phone to show a group of kids a video he thought was interesting. One of the kids in that group happened to be Elijah Holloway. Elijah had stood there staring at the screen, watching his own father get handcuffed in front of strangers, hearing the whispers of the people in the video, seeing his father's head lower in that terrible moment of shame. He recognized the gray uniform. He recognized the toolbox. He recognized the way his father's shoulders sagged. The same way they sagged every night when Darius came home exhausted from another double shift. The older student holding the phone had no idea he was showing the boy his own father. He was just laughing and pointing and saying something about how quickly the guy had gone down without fighting back. And then the 8-year-old had turned around, run out of the cafeteria, and locked himself in a bathroom stall where he cried harder than he had cried since his mother's funeral. His teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, had found him 20 minutes later, still shaking. She had gently unlocked the stall door, sat down on the cold tile floor beside him, and let him cry into her shoulder for a long time before saying anything at all. When he finally caught his breath, he looked up at her with wet eyes and asked the question no 8-year-old should ever have to ask. "Is my daddy going to prison?" Mrs. Alvarez did not know the answer. She just held him tighter and told him that no matter what happened, he was safe, he was loved, and his father was going to be so proud of how brave he was being. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to explain to a child what he had just seen. Nobody knew that in another part of the city, his father was already being released, his name was already being cleared, and a retired Navy SEAL was already thinking about what it was going to take to help that little boy heal from something that a piece of paper could never undo. Big Cross said it out loud in the detective's office before they even brought Darius out. Clearing his name is not enough. Nobody thinks about what a thing like this does to a child. That boy saw something today he can never unsee. We have to fix more than just the paperwork. We have to give that family back the peace that was stolen from them this morning. The police chief agreed. Within hours, he held an emergency press conference. He stood in front of every local news camera and personally apologized to Darius Holloway by name. He explained that a rush to judgment had led to a wrongful arrest, that Darius was completely innocent, and that the real suspects were now in custody. He said the department would be reviewing its arrest procedures to make sure something like this never happened to another innocent person again. That press conference was recorded, uploaded, and shared even faster than the original arrest video. Millions of people who had watched a father get humiliated in the morning saw him publicly cleared by nightfall. Later that evening, Darius returned to the Belmont Grand Hotel. He was not expecting a warm welcome. In fact, he had almost decided to skip the visit entirely. He was tired. He was embarrassed. He was worried about seeing his coworkers again after what had happened. But Diane Whitaker had asked him to come by, and he owed her at least that much. When he walked through the revolving door, he stopped in his tracks. The entire lobby was full. Every single employee of the hotel, from the executive chef to the youngest bellhop, was standing in a quiet crowd waiting for him. Diane stepped forward first. She did not give a speech. She did not make a scene. She simply walked up to Darius, wrapped her arms around him, and hugged him for a long time in complete silence. And then, one by one, every other employee stepped forward and did the same thing. When the hugging was finally over, Diane cleared her throat and made an announcement to the entire staff. She said that Darius Holloway remained one of the most honorable employees the Belmont Grand had ever hired, and that the hotel was going to do more than just apologize with words. She announced that the hotel would cover the entire cost of Elijah Holloway's education for the next 10 years, all the way through college if he wanted to go. She announced that Darius was being promoted to head of maintenance operations with a significant raise and a private office. And she announced that a public statement would be released the following morning to make sure everyone in the city knew exactly who Darius Holloway really was. Several employees openly wiped away tears. Darius could barely speak. Big Cross stood at the back of the crowd, hands folded in front of him, wearing the same calm and unreadable expression he had worn through more life and death moments than most people could imagine. He never asked for recognition. He never wanted a spotlight. He believed, deep in his bones, that real leadership was quiet, and that the whole point of being strong was to use that strength for people who could not fight for themselves in a given moment. When one of the younger employees walked up to him afterward and tried to thank him, Big Cross just shook his head and gently said, "This was not my doing. This was just the right thing to do. Any decent man in my shoes would have done the same." The younger employee walked away wondering if that was really true, or if the world was mostly filled with people who talked about doing the right thing without ever actually stepping up to do it. That evening, Darius finally drove home. The whole way there, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. He did not know what he was going to say to Elijah. He did not know how to explain any of it. He did not know if his son would run to him or shrink away. He parked the truck in the driveway, took a long, shaky breath, and slowly walked toward the front door. He never made it that far. Elijah had been watching for him through the living room window for hours. The moment the truck pulled in, the boy burst through the front door, sprinted across the yard in his socks, and threw both arms around his father with a force that almost knocked Darius off his feet. Neither of them said anything at first. Darius dropped to his knees on the grass and held his son as tightly as a human being can hold another human being. Elijah buried his face in his father's shoulder and cried and cried and cried. And Darius, for the first time in a very long time, cried right along with him. When they finally pulled back and looked at each other, Elijah wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve and whispered, "Dad, I saw the video. But I knew. I always knew. You would never do that. Never." Darius could barely breathe. He kissed his son on the forehead and whispered back, "I love you more than anything on this earth. You know that, right?" Elijah nodded and hugged him again. Then the boy leaned back, looked his father right in the eye, and said something that Darius would remember for the rest of his life. "Dad, when I saw the video today, I was scared. But I was not scared for the reason the other kids thought. I was not scared because I thought you did something bad. I was scared because I knew you did not do it, and I did not know how to help you. I felt so little. I felt like a baby. I did not know what to do." Darius pulled him back into another hug and squeezed him so tight the boy laughed through his tears. "Buddy," he whispered into his son's ear, "you did the only thing you needed to do. You believed in me. That is what helped me the most. You believed in me even when strangers did not. And I will never forget that as long as I live." That night, they sat together on the back porch and finished painting the little wooden birdhouse. The colors did not always stay inside the lines. Some of the paint dripped down the sides. Elijah accidentally got a big smear of blue on his own cheek and burst into giggles when Darius pointed it out. It was not the neatest birdhouse in the world. It was not the fanciest. But to Darius, that little wooden birdhouse became the most beautiful thing he had ever built in his entire life. Because it reminded him that home is not made out of wood or walls. Home is made out of people who refuse to give up on each other, no matter what the world throws at them. Word of what had happened spread quickly through their neighborhood. That night and every night for the next full week, people started showing up at the Holloway front door with hot food. A neighbor 2 doors down brought a full pan of baked macaroni and cheese. A woman from the church brought a pot of collard greens and a homemade sweet potato pie. An older couple across the street brought a whole roasted chicken with rice and gravy. A single mother from 3 blocks over brought a warm loaf of cornbread wrapped in a checkered kitchen towel. Kids from Elijah's school brought handmade cards with rainbows and hearts drawn all over them. Some of the cards just said things like, "You are a good dad," or "We believe you." One little girl had drawn a picture of Elijah and his father standing next to a birdhouse, holding hands, with a big yellow sun in the corner and the words "Family is forever" written across the top in careful crooked letters. Darius taped that drawing to the refrigerator door. It stayed there for years. An older man from down the street, a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Callahan, walked up the front steps one evening with a small paper bag in his hand. Inside the bag was a leather-bound journal and a good pen. He handed it to Darius without much ceremony and said, "Write it down. All of it, not for the world, for your boy. One day he is going to want to understand what his father survived, and when he asks, you will have the answers already written." Darius did not know what to say. He just nodded and shook the older man's hand. He did start writing in that journal. He wrote almost every night, sometimes just a sentence or two, sometimes pages at a time. He wrote about Simone, about the arrest, about Big Cross, about Elijah, about everything he wanted his son to know one day. Darius could not remember the last time he had felt so seen, so held, so loved by people who had known him only from a distance and had chosen, in a difficult moment, to come closer instead of turning away. For years he had believed, deep down, that he was raising his son alone. That belief had kept him going through the worst of it, but it had also made him feel small and invisible on the days when he had needed strength the most. Now, in the space of a single week, he was learning something he wished he had known all along. He had never actually been alone. The whole time there had been people around him who cared. He had just been too tired, too proud, too afraid of being a burden to let them help. That week, he stopped being afraid. That week, he let them in. A few days later, Big Cross came by with a small aluminum ladder, a hammer, and a handful of nails. He did not say much when he arrived. He just quietly took the finished birdhouse off the porch railing, walked into the backyard, and climbed halfway up a tall oak tree that had been standing there long before the house was built. He hammered a small wooden mounting bracket into the trunk, hung the birdhouse on it, and climbed back down without a word. 2 weeks later, a small family of songbirds discovered the birdhouse and moved in. Elijah spent an entire Saturday morning sitting in the backyard with a pair of binoculars, watching the birds fly in and out. He named each one of them, gave them all little personalities, and made his father promise never to move that birdhouse from that tree, no matter what happened. Darius promised. He knew he would keep that promise for the rest of his life. Life did not magically become perfect after that. Bills still arrived. Work was still demanding. There were still long, lonely evenings when Darius sat in the quiet after Elijah had gone to sleep and missed Simone so much that his chest ached. There were still nights when he wondered if he was doing enough, if he was being enough, if he was giving his son everything a mother would have given if she had lived. Those doubts never fully went away. They never do, for any parent who has walked that road. But now, father and son understood something they would never forget. They understood that one false accusation, one moment of terrible bad luck, one cruel twist of fate can shake a life down to its foundations. But they also understood that truth is a stubborn thing, that courage is contagious, that real friendship is a kind of quiet armor, and that when good people refuse to give up on each other, no lie is strong enough and no injustice is heavy enough to keep a family down for long. Elijah started sleeping through the night again a few weeks later. He stopped waking up scared. He stopped asking questions about the video. Kids at school stopped whispering behind his back. Mrs. Alvarez, the teacher who had found him crying in the bathroom that day, kept a quiet eye on him for the rest of the school year and made sure he always had someone to sit with at lunch. She never made a big deal of it. She just cared. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses turn out to be the ones that hold a child together. Life slowly, carefully, gently returned to normal. Darius kept his new position at the hotel. Diane Whitaker began meeting with him once a month over coffee to talk about ways the hotel could support other employees who were quietly carrying heavy burdens outside of work. Big Cross continued to stop by for Sunday dinners, where Elijah would beg him to tell stories about his old military days, and Big Cross would always politely refuse, and always end up telling one anyway. Trevor and his contractor partner were charged with multiple counts of grand theft, conspiracy, and identity fraud. Both eventually pled guilty and served prison time. The video of the police chief's public apology continued to circulate online for months. It was used in training sessions at several police departments across the country as an example of how a rush to judgment can shatter an innocent person's life. Darius never watched it. He never wanted to. He preferred to keep his eyes on the road ahead, not the road behind. And every evening, when he came home from work, the first thing he did was walk out to the backyard and look up at the birdhouse in the oak tree. Sometimes the birds were there. Sometimes they were not. But that little wooden structure kept swaying gently in the wind, kept holding its ground against every storm, kept reminding him of one very simple truth. Homes are built by hands. Families are built by love. And futures are built by every single quiet decision to keep going, even when the world tells you to stop. If this story touched your heart tonight, please take a moment to like this video, leave a heartfelt comment below, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. Your support allows us to keep bringing more inspiring stories of hope, courage, and resilience to people who need them most. And if you truly believe that honesty, loyalty, and kindness will always shine through, no matter how dark the moment may seem, drop the words "truth always wins" in the comments below. We read every single one, and we love hearing from you. Because sometimes the strongest heroes in this world are not the ones wearing uniforms or medals. Sometimes they are simply single fathers who wake up every morning with tired eyes and heavy hearts, who keep every promise they ever made to their children, who protect their families with quiet strength no one ever sees, and who choose hope over despair one day at a time. They prove, without ever saying a word, that real courage is not something loud or flashy. Real courage is found in ordinary hearts that refuse to stop loving, no matter how hard the world tries to make them. Darius Holloway is one of those heroes. Big Cross is another. And in a world that too often forgets about the good people, their story reminds us that there are still men out there worth believing in. There are still fathers holding their families together with nothing but love and grit. There are still friends who will drop everything to fight for you when the whole world turns its back. There are still neighbors willing to knock on your door with a warm meal when they hear you are hurting. There are still teachers willing to sit on a bathroom floor with a crying child until the crying stops. There are still bosses willing to stand up for their employees when the world tries to tear them down. There are still small miracles happening every day in quiet neighborhoods, in ordinary houses, under ordinary trees where ordinary birds find their way home to ordinary birdhouses built by boys who still believe in their fathers. That is the world we live in. Sometimes we just have to look a little harder to see it. And sometimes, all it takes is one story, one arrest, one truth, and one little wooden birdhouse to remind us that love is still the strongest thing on this earth. Love outlasts lies. Love outlasts fear. Love outlasts every cold morning when handcuffs click shut on innocent wrists. Love is what walks a father back through the front door of his own home at the end of the longest day of his life. Love is what waits at the window with the porch light on,